Welcome to the show. This is your host and brother, Luis Roman. And today I have a very, very special guest. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you know him. And a lot of you maybe don't know him. He is Dr. K. We're going to call him Dr. K today. He asked me to call him that way, but I know his name, his full name is Peter Kwasniewski. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I quote him very often in the show, even though our show is in Spanish. We use his writings and his article for many topics. So today, as you can see, the show is going to be in English. Vamos a colocar las letras, los subtítulos en español para las personas que no hablan inglés. Así que no se vayan, que tenemos un temazo hoy. Vamos a estar hablando de rito romano, de ayer y del futuro, de todo lo que ha sucedido en la iglesia con toda esta batalla litúrgica. Y vamos a estar hablando de un libro que todos tienen que comprar, y lo mejor de todo es que está en español. Así que no se pierdan eso. Después de esta parte voy a seguir hablando en inglés. Dr. K, first of all, I want to say, I want to give you a welcome to the show. How you doing, Dr. K?
Very well. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, Mr. Peter, that's your name. I'm really happy to have you. Thank you for accepting my invitation. We're going to discuss and we're going to talk about this book that is not new, but I know it's new in Spanish, if I'm not mistaken. El Rito Romano de Ayer y del Futuro. And I know my audience, a lot of, I will say 40%, maybe, or 30% of my audience is bilingual. That's the percentage that I have in the United States watching the show. So I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Hispanic that speak English as well. But I wanted the doctor here in our show because he has a lot to offer to the Spanish community. And we're going to talk about this topic. Thanks to our show, a lot of people for the first time discover the Latin Mass, the Latin Rite. And they've been noticing that it's not just the liturgy, it's much more. It's the doctrine, it's the way we live, how we're supposed to become saints, what actually is Catholicism, who is Jesus. All of that is in there. So all that is going to be discussed today. But before we start talking and asking the questions to Dr. Kwasniewski, we're going to pray. And we usually, as everybody knows, we start with an Ave Maria. So we're going to pray in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tui mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. You pray so calm. I had that problem. Maybe because I'm Puerto Rican. We talk too fast. Dr. Kwasniewski, wanted to inform the people, that he's a doctor. He has a PhD in philosophy and from the Catholic University of America and BA in liberal arts from the Thomas Aquinas College in California. And also he earned the PhD, as I said, from the Catholic University of America. Dr. Kwasniewski, over the past 20 years, has published more than 1,300 articles. And those are the ones that sometimes I quote in the show. And he talked from many topics, not just the liturgy. And his articles has been translated into at least 18 languages. He has edited and written more than 20 books. So we're talking about a person that really know about the topic. And I wanted to start just right off about the book. Why do you decided to write this book or put everything together for this topic?
Yes, so this particular book is about why there is only one Roman rite. There are not two Roman rites, the old one and the new one, but there's the Roman rite, which we have from our history, our Catholic history, over 1,500 years worth of organic development. And then we have the modern rite of Paul VI, which was created in the 1960s by a committee of scholars and ideologues, I think you'd have to say, and is an unprecedented rupture from the whole Roman tradition. There is very little in common between the traditional Roman rite and the modern rite of Paul VI. And so in my book, I really wanted to explain this in a way that would be clear and accessible and comprehensive, and to show people what's at stake, the important issues that are at stake between the old way of worshiping and the modern replacement that was given to us.
Doctor, and can you number a few of those big? I know some people talk about in the past it used to be the sacrifice of the mass. Now it's a banquet. Now it's more like a feast, or I don't want to say a party, but that's how it looks sometimes. Are the what you're talking about, or you has more deep issues between the two?
There are many layers, but just to take one layer.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman Catholic Church worshipped for its entire history from the 4th century to the 20th century in the Latin language. And this language wasn't just a vernacular language in the 4th century. The Latin of the liturgy was always a lofty and high language, a poetic, rhetorical language, not the common vernacular of the people. It never was. And once the church committed herself in the West to Latin as the predominant language of the late Roman Empire, from that point onwards, the church conservatively preserved that language in order to preserve the meaning of all of the prayers that were written in that language by the great saints of the past. And, there's this saying about translation is treachery, is betrayal. Translation is difficult. I know that. We're talking about my book in Spanish. There's no such thing as a perfect translation. The Latin language is a sacred language for the Western Church, just like Slavonic is for the Eastern Church, for the Russian Church. Greek is for the Greek Church. Coptic is for the Coptic Church. There are all of these special languages of worship. That's one feature, one characteristic. Another one that's even deeper is the content of the prayers. When you look at the prayers of the Old Missal, they are more realistic. They talk about sin and death and judgment, and guilt and virtue and vice, and the kingship of Christ. I mean, they talk about these big themes that are very realistic and sometimes negative. And that we need to hear these themes. And in the modern missal of Paul VI, all of these themes have been not either suppressed or softened. Everything's been softened and made more positive, right? More optimistic, if you will, in keeping with Vatican II. So there's often a different theology at work in the old liturgy and in the new liturgy. And so that's a very important difference. Another one that I would point out, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but you pointed out the sacrificial language of the Old Missal. In fact, the Old Missal is centered on the Eucharist and on the Eucharistic sacrifice, the Mass as a representation of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, of which the Eucharist is the efficacious sign. And the new liturgy that's not absent from the new liturgy, but it's muted. It's much quieter, and now the people, the community, has been emphasized with the meal, with the Mass as a meal. The Mass is a banquet, but it's primarily a sacrifice, and that has been lost, not just in the way people do things, but even in the Missal itself of Paul VI, that is muted. And then finally, I'll just throw this one last thought out because it's a big question you ask. Everything in the old liturgy, and it's not just the Mass, it's the divine office, it's all the other sacramental rites, all of it is required to be done. It's all mandatory. There are no options. And the rubrics are very detailed. They tell the priest exactly what to do, where to stand, where to put his feet, where to put his eyes, how to pronounce the words. Everything is done, is given in detail, so that everything will be done as reverently and as beautifully and as fittingly as possible. In the new rite, there are very poor, inadequate rubrics. There are many options. The priest can do A or B or C. And so every Mass can be different from every other one because it has all these pieces that can be put together in different ways. He can choose a la carte from which Eucharistic prayer to use, 1, 2, 3, 4, or another one. And so the new Mass is essentially variable, and the old Mass is fixed in place. What it is what it is. And this has a profound effect on how we experience the liturgy, right? You know, what many people who go to the Old Mass, they say it was so moving and so comforting that the Old Mass is always the same. You know, whenever I go to it, whoever the priest is, wherever I go in the world, it's the same, right? Mm-hmm. But with the new Mass, they're all different. Every church is different. Every diocese is different. Every country is different. You know, there's no unity there.
So, Doctor, why do you think this happened? We know there is a modernism in the church. We know all these things that some of the hierarchy things is, and I don't like to think wrong about people, you know. So let's say they think it's the best. How we get here? Because maybe at the beginning wasn't that bad, but it's still a rupture. And now we know, we see the news. I cover all this in my show as well, all the abuses, the liturgy and things that they do now. Why the church took that step, which is not organic?
Yes, it's not organic at all. It's a rupture. It's a break, right? Why did the break happen? I think that, to put it in simple terms, there was a conviction on the part of some intellectuals in the church, especially Paul VI. Giovanni Battista Montini was one of these intellectuals. These intellectuals were convinced that the church was losing its hold on modern Western people because of a failure to reach them, to communicate with them. They thought that modern people were drifting away from the church because it was no longer relevant, because the liturgy was in a foreign language, Latin. It was mysterious. You couldn't hear what the priest was saying. It was perhaps kind of closed or sealed off. And these intellectuals felt that if they could only put the liturgy in a vernacular language and have the priest face the people and talk to them, and everybody could see what was going on, that suddenly there would be this excitement and people would start coming to the church and everybody would feel participatory and they'd all be involved, right? That's what they thought would happen. That's exactly the opposite of what happened, right? I mean, when the rituals were changed, first of all, the people who were attached to those rituals were scandalized and injured and depressed about the changes. And many Catholics left the church. Millions of Catholics left the church. And we know that many of them left because of the liturgical changes. As far as modern people are concerned, if they're not religious, why would they be attracted to something which is not really entertaining to them? I mean, the music that's used in churches nowadays is only a second-rate or third-rate imitation of popular music. You know, if people are looking for excitement, they're going to find it in the nightclub. They're not going to find it in the Catholic Church, right? It's only the people who are looking for the truth about God and Christ and human salvation are going to look at the Catholic Church. And when those people look at the Catholic Church, they want to see a mysterious, beautiful, solemn ritual that says this is different from what the world can give, right? This is like the peace of Christ. Not as the world gives, do I give to you, Christ says, right? So his peace is different. And the liturgy should be different from what the world gives. And so this theory of the intellectuals was exactly the opposite of the truth. The other thing I would just point out briefly is that it was very common for academics, for intellectuals in the middle of the 20th century to hold that the Catholic liturgy had become corrupted over hundreds of years. It had become corrupted in the Middle Ages primarily. And so they agreed essentially with the Protestants, who said the same thing, that there was an original pure form of Christian worship that was more based on fellowship and the meal and sharing the Eucharist and whatever. And that's what the early Christians had. And as time went on, the church became more clericalist and more superstitious. and and more elaborate, and everything was done in a whisper and in Latin and whatever, and so it alienated the people. This is what
the Holy Spirit went on vacation for
yes,
a couple thousand years.
that's what these intellectuals, they didn't say that in so many words, but they basically held that divine providence must have stopped guiding the liturgy at a certain point. And in a sense, God let the liturgy go to seed. He let it fall apart, and it required people like Annibale Bugnini, and Paul VI to put it back together again and to make it as it was supposed to be. That's kind of the view that they had. I mean, it's an absurd view in and of itself, because it dishonors divine providence. It dishonors the Holy Spirit. Nobody in the church prior to the 20th century ever complained about the liturgy. I mean, they never said this is wrong and we need to revamp it. We need to completely revise it. The only people who said that were the Jansenists, the Jansenists who were influenced by Protestantism and in a way were a bit like proto-modernists. They complained that the liturgy, about all of these aspects of the liturgy, but the church condemned them at the time, right? Pius VI condemned the Jansenists for holding these false views about the liturgy.
Yeah, and then you have of course, the Council of Trent, with the strong defense of the liturgy and everything that the church always has done. Do you what? I mean, I just want to let's put it this way. Vatican II, I know Sacrosanctum Concilium, they asked for something. And I know in some of your books you discuss this topic that maybe, prior to the Vatican II, there was some movement of, well, maybe we should change this or add this. But I don't know if I am wrong, but when I read Sacrosanctum Concilium, and I don't see there that they asking for a new mass. Mm-hmm. They do asking for some renewal or something. I don't know.
Yes.
What can you say about that?
Vatican II is, of course, a very complicated subject in its own right. But focusing on just this first document on the liturgy, Sacrosanctum Concilium, there are two things we can say about this document, speaking broadly. The first is that the recommendations given about liturgical reform were fairly moderate. They had to be moderate because most of the bishops at the council did not want radical reform and would never have voted for it if it had called for radical reform. If a document had been put in front of the 2,000 bishops of Vatican II that said, we will get rid of Latin, we will get rid of chant, we will get rid of the Roman canon or make it optional and hardly ever used. We're going to have women in the sanctuary distributing the body of Christ, etc., etc. The bishops would have risen up in an outcry and they would have said, never, no, we'll never vote for such a thing, right? So the document had to be phrased in such a way that it would gain the votes of the majority, the vast majority of the bishops. And so it says Latin should be retained, Gregorian chant should have pride of place. It doesn't talk about women doing anything in the sanctuary. It doesn't talk about versus populum at all, right? I mean, I could go on and on, right? So the document in some ways reads like a conservative document. However, Annibale Bugnini said he was the secretary. He was the secretary of the committee that wrote Sacrosanctum Concilium, just as he was the secretary of the liturgical reform body afterwards. And he gave a speech to this committee in which he said, and we have this written down. It's not a conspiracy theory. We have the evidence. He said to the committee, don't ask for too much and be ambiguous, be vague in what you're asking for, because afterwards, once this is approved, we can take it in the direction that we want to. right?
Mhm.
So he was very Machiavellian. That's exactly the word that I would use. And so all along, there were radical people who knew that they wanted to do various things, but they didn't want the bishops at Vatican II to know it, right? So you can read about this in Yves Chiron's biography of Annibale Bugnini.
Yes, we have discussed this topic. I forgot to tell you, Father Murr. He's been in the show a couple times.
Good. Excellent.
Yes, yeah. He discussed that topic as well, and about Annibale Bugnini
Yes.
and the infiltration, the Masons, and the influence and the investigation of Cardinal Gagnon and all that.
Exactly.
I recommend people to watch that show as well. Well, it's in Spanish, but I
Yes.
recommend them to watch it. I wanted to ask you two more questions so we can finish, but one for me, and I want the audience to understand this battle. I say battle because it's something we are defending the Catholic tradition. You know, when we trying to we're trying to invite people to see the Latin Mass, but not just the Latin Mass, to become saints,
Yeah.
and that's what I wanted to ask you. Uh, how what is the difference? Because a lot of people say, yeah, I understand, Louis. The old Mass is beautiful. Everything is more organized, more reverent, and all that. But it's still valid. The new Mass is still valid, and I can read my Bible and become a saint. So what is the big deal?
Mhm.
And what do you say to those people?
Mhm. Well, I guess I would say a couple of things. One is that the Catholic faith exists in the mode of tradition. That is to say, something handed down. The only reason we have the Catholic faith is that it was handed down from Christ to the apostles and from the apostles to their successors all throughout Christian history, all throughout the last 20 centuries. And part of the deposit of faith was the worship of the church. Now, the worship has developed. It certainly has developed, just like doctrine has developed. The way we talk about doctrine has developed. But the attitude of all of the saints in history was always very respectful towards the liturgy, towards the inherited liturgy, the treasury of the past. They never had this attitude that, oh, that's dispensable, that's irrelevant, that's accidental, that's optional. They never had that attitude. Catholicism doesn't exist primarily as a book, like a catechism, or even as the Bible, the way the Protestants think about Christianity. It's the Bible, in a sense, right? For us, it's the living tradition that includes the lex orandi, the way we pray, the lex credendi, what we believe, and the lex vivendi, how we live, our moral life, our spiritual life, right? These are inseparable. It's like a cable that's made up of 3 strands, right? And the cable or the rope is stronger because it has those 3 strands, together.
Mhm.
If you have just one strand, it's going to snap, it's going to break. So all we have to do is look at the statistics and see that the church was always successful transmitting the faith and evangelizing with her creed and her cult, her liturgy, and her code, her morals. She was always successful throughout the whole of history until the tragedy and the scandals of the last 50, 60 years, right? There is something going on right now that is unprecedented. The church in the Western world is, it's in many ways, it's dying. It will never die completely because Christ is with it and the church will always exist somewhere. But there has never been such a catastrophe as we have seen in the past, I'm going to say 60 years. It's really it kind of begins after World War II and then culminates during and after Vatican II. This catastrophe, right, is affecting everybody. And we have to ask, what are the deepest reasons for it and the deepest remedies? And the remedies, again, are not just the catechism, not just the Bible, not just the liturgy, but all of it. We have to have all of these things, right? They all belong together. They're like members of the same family, right? They share the same genetic code, right? And we have to recognize that this idea that validity is the only thing that matters about Mass is absurd. I mean, think about if somebody said about their marriage, oh, I have a valid marriage. I mean, that would be like the worst. That would be the least thing that you could say about your marriage, right? I mean, hopefully you could say, I have a happy and fruitful marriage, right? Not just a valid marriage, right? That's so validity is the minimum, not the maximum, right? And Catholics should be maximalists. We should want to do all for the glory of God, all for Christ the King, the best we can do, the most we can do, the best he deserves. This is what tradition gives us.
Yes, definitely. I wanted to ask you, I read on the foreword of the book, and then we're going to talk about how people can get this book and other books that Dr. Kwasniewski has in Spanish as well. That's one of them, Reivindicación de nuestros derechos hereditarios como católicos, de la Misa Tradicional. What else? We had also Resurgimiento en medio de la crisis. And I'm going to share the links on Amazon so you can buy it. I got that one too. It's a great book, La verdadera obediencia de la Iglesia. A lot of people ask about that question. Yes. But we be disobedience. What is obedience? Yeah. It's a great book. Read it. You're gonna love it. I had this one, but this one is not Spanish, right? This one yet?
No, not yet.
Tradition and Sanity is a good book too. If you speak English, go ahead and buy it. But I wanted to ask you, because I read, and it for me was a little bit interesting. I read it on the foreword that you asked, or I don't know if you did it or it's just like a sarcastic joke. I don't know. Did you ask or send a request to UNESCO, the United Nations, to basically protect the Latin rite of the traditional Latin Mass as a patrimony of humanity? I'm just asking because I know we cannot ask right now the hierarchy to help us.
So in fact, just recently, a few months ago, I and three other authors and I co-authored a paper that appeared in the official UNESCO journal called Laws. You can look it up on the internet. And it's called something like the traditional Latin Mass as intangible cultural heritage. And what we're arguing there, it's a very serious scholarly paper with all the arguments and zillions of footnotes. What we're arguing is that the traditional Latin Mass qualifies as what UNESCO calls intangible cultural heritage, meaning that it is something that can be protected. A government can ask to protect this as a culture, as an intangible cultural heritage. And if that protection is granted, then it has a special legal status. Nobody can attack it, not even the Vatican. Now, of course, this is a strange idea because the United Nations is completely secular and they are full of weird ideas and bad ideas. But the idea of intangible cultural heritage has, in fact, helped to protect many, many good things around the world. I mean, hundreds, thousands of things are protected because of this. And as a result, they have a kind of sanctuary, a sort of safety. And these three authors and I were proposing this as possibly a way to signify to the world the importance of this heritage, right? If the hierarchs in the church won't listen to us, maybe the world will listen to us, right? And I think that that's true because there are many examples of great artists and historians and philosophers who respect the traditional Latin Mass, even though they're not Catholics, because they see it for what it is. It's a majestic, wonderful, rich, glorious pageant of symbols and of beauty. You know, they see it as something magnificent and something to be treasured. The Agatha Christie petition is probably the most famous example of that.
Excellent. Doctor, thank you very much. I wanted to give you a couple minutes to conclude, to give you an opportunity, whatever you want to share with the people that are watching us regarding the topic or any other topic.
Certainly. Yes, I think now more than ever, now is a time not to lose heart, not to grow faint, not to lose our courage, but to remain staunchly committed to Catholic tradition in all of its dimensions. we should try to get to the Latin Mass whenever we can, as often as we can. But we should also pray the Rosary every day, and explicitly pray for the conversion of the Pope, and pray for the preservation and the propagation of the traditional liturgy of the Roman Church, the most beautiful thing this side of heaven, as Father Faber called it. We should pray the divine office a little bit, at least, if we can. Not everybody can do that, but for example, I pray Prime, the office of Prime, every morning. It's the short morning office from the breviary. And in that way, there are various ways we can keep in touch with the traditional liturgy, even when it's under attack, or even if it's never been made available to us. We can take a missal, a daily missal, and we can pray with the texts of the daily Mass. That is, if it's the feast of, Saint Bonaventure, we could open up to the feast of Saint Bonaventure, and we could pray and read those readings and those prayers. At home, we could do this as part of our prayer time. So there are various ways in which we can remain grounded in tradition and committed to it. And now more than ever, we need that, because the modernists are currently in the highest positions in the church, but they will not be there forever. And someday they will be gone, and we need to be ready to rush in and fill in the gap with our traditional Catholic faith.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. Again, I'm going to share the links of every book that the Dr. Kwasniewski can offer. He's offering right now. And mostly, Doctor, you said to me before we started the recording, go to Amazon, right? Or do you have any other website or
Yes.
source?
So Amazon is, unfortunately, it's the best place. I say unfortunately because none of us really likes it. But
I know what you're saying.
but it's present in so many countries where Spanish is spoken, or people can get books sent to them. And yes, the shipping costs a little bit, but it's the only way to get these books out. And so we're using it. We're making use of it as we can. But I do have a website called osjustipress.com. That's my publishing house, Os Justi Press. And I make available some of my Spanish language books on that website, even though they're not published by Os Justi, but they're there if people want to order them from me. I can ship things to anywhere. So
okay, excellent. We're going to share that link too. And thank you.
I should also just say some of the books are available as ebooks, which of course is much cheaper, because then you don't have to spend the postage. So.
Definitely. Thank you, Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. I think I pronounced it right. I don't know. And for accepting my invitation, for everything that you said tonight or today. And I ask the audience once again to visit these links, to share the tradition. This is a great gift for other people, and it's good also. It's a good read. Instead of wasting your time in the TV or looking in social media what's going on, take a good book and read it and learn about your faith and live it. That's the main thing, so we can become saints. That's the goal, as we can say in a secular way.
Yes.
Yes. Doctor, I just want to say thank you, and I will say goodbye to everybody. Thank you very much. And Santa María, ora pro nobis. Que Dios me los bendiga. Bye-bye.